Today we're jumping right into an absolutely epic historical adventure. We're talking about daring sea explorers, a rise to power, and then its spectacular crash. We're going to see exactly how a tiny country in Europe managed to completely flip the world upside down.
To understand why this whole story even begins, you've got to ask yourself this. What if you paid 10 times more for food? What if you suddenly had to pay 10 times more? Well, that was basically the spice problem in 15th century Europe. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the old land and sea routes to India were totally cut off. Arab merchants held a strict monopoly on highly demanded goods like pepper and silk. Because the goods had to pass through so many middlemen, by the time those spices actually reached Europe, the prices were just insanely high. They desperately needed a direct sea route, and they needed it fast. So think of today's explainer as a level map for our adventure. Here is the roadmap. Level 1 is the quest for spices. Level 2, arrival in India. Level 3 explores how they went from trading to ruling. And finally, Level 4, the fall of the empire. Let's start right off with Level 1, the quest for spices.
Back in the 15th century, Europe had these advanced new ships and a serious drive to bypass that Arab spice monopoly. The competition to find a sea route to India was so fierce, the Pope actually stepped in and divided the world in half.
Seriously, in 1494, he drew an imaginary line nesting 300 miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Everything west of the line went to Spain, and everything east went to Portugal. Just like that, with the stroke of a pen, the race to India was officially on. Which brings us to Level 2. Level 2, in India. Getting there was, well, it wasn't easy. First, in 1487, a navigator named Bartholomew Diaz managed to round the southern tip of Africa. Then, a decade later, Vasco da Gama went all the way. In May 1498, he finally arrived at Calicut in India.
The local ruler, Zamorin, actually welcomed him warmly, mostly because his kingdom thrived on open trade. Da Gama went home incredibly rich from selling pepper. But things changed really fast. When the Portuguese came back, they weren't just looking to trade.
By 1503, they had built a military fort at Cochin, and by 1505, another one at Cananor.
For centuries, the Indian Ocean was a bustling hub. Indian, Arab, African, and Chinese merchants all traded using these unspoken rules of mutual respect.
Nobody tried to control everything, right? They just wanted to make a profit. But the Portuguese completely ignored those rules. They showed up with heavy cannons mounted on their ships.
They had zero interest in sharing.
Instead, they destroyed the smaller merchant ships of the traders in the region. The Portuguese aggressively used violence to kick out Arab competitors and take total, exclusive control of the spice trade. That aggressive shift takes us right into Level 3, from trading to ruling. The Portuguese realized pretty quickly that just being merchants wasn't going to be enough to protect their spice monopoly. They had to become conquerors.
Merchants alone cannot secure our trade. We must conquer to protect it.
In 1505, Governor Francisco de Almeida introduced a brilliant but ruthless strategy called the Blue Water Policy. His idea was simple. If Portugal controls the ocean, they control India. They didn't even want to conquer huge inland territories. They just wanted to rule the water using their naval power and a strict permit system called the Cartaz. Basically, they were forcing every other ship on the water to buy a super expensive ticket just for the right to sail through these waters. And just think about how fast this empire grew. In 1509, Almeida crushed a massive rival fleet, securing total dominance over the water. Then came the real empire builder, Afonso de Albuquerque. In 1510, he effortlessly captured the major city of Goa. Goa became the capital of Portuguese India, and Albuquerque started making huge cultural changes, like banning the local practice of sati. And their momentum just kept pushing up the western coast of India. They took advantage of local rivalries and ended up conquering the island of Diu in 1535, and then capturing Daman in 1530. In 1559, they were able to consolidate all of this expansion, which created what was known as the Estado Português da India. This wasn't just a couple of isolated forts. It was a massive, highly organized coastal empire. It stretched seamlessly across a huge chain of heavily guarded seaports and trading posts, going all the way from the coast of Africa right over to China. So what was it actually like to live under Portuguese rule during all this? Well, it was a really mixed bag.
On one hand, they created a unique, blended culture by encouraging intermarriage with locals. They introduced crops you probably eat today, like cashews and tobacco. They brought in advanced military drills, new shipbuilding techniques, and even sent Jesuit scholars to meet the great Mughal Emperor Akbar. But there was a very dark side to all this. They brought the Inquisition to Goa, which meant harsh religious persecution of Muslims and Hindus. They were also deeply involved in the brutal coastal slave trade and outright persecution and piracy. So it was an era of incredible new technology and connection, but also extreme violence.
Let's move to level 4, the fall of the empire.
After nearly a century of total dominance, the Portuguese got a bit too arrogant, and a dramatic series of events led straight to their downfall.
Step 1. In 1608, an English captain named Hawkins arrived in Surat. He spoke the local languages and actually befriended the Mughal emperor, which absolutely terrified the Portuguese. Step 2. In 1612, English ships completely defeated the Portuguese navy, proving to the whole world that they weren't invincible anymore.
And step 3 is where they really pushed their luck too far. Over in Bengal, Portuguese pirates kidnapped 2 servants belonging to Mumtaz Mahal. You know, the famous empress that Taj Mahal was built for. Yeah, bad move. Furious, the Emperor Shah Jahan laid siege to their settlement in Hooghly in Bengal in 1632 and absolutely crushed them.
So how does such a massive empire just collapse? We can really break it down into 4 main reasons.
First, their extreme religious intolerance created widespread fear and hatred among the local populations. Second, their constant piracy and dishonest trade practices caused local kings and the massive Mughal Empire to finally strike back. Third, Portugal had recently discovered Brazil, which heavily distracted them and drained all their resources away from India. And finally, powerful new rivals. The Dutch and the English started showing up with way more money, better organization, and a fierce drive to steal that spice trade for themselves. Once those dominoes started falling, their empire collapsed incredibly fast. By 1596, the Dutch had pushed them entirely out of Southeast Asia. By 1612, they lost their powerful influence in Surat to the English. And by 1663, the Dutch had swept in and taken over absolutely all of the Portuguese forts on the Malabar coast. Their mighty ocean monopoly was officially broken. You know, this entire epic story is actually brilliantly summed up by a Portuguese governor from the 1540s, Alfonso de Sousa. He wrote, and I quote, "The Portuguese entered India with the sword in one hand and the crucifix in the other. Finding much gold, they laid aside the crucifix to fill their pockets. They dropped the sword too. Being found in this posture by those who came after, they were easily overcome." It is just the perfect summary of how greed, laziness, and overconfidence led to their ultimate defeat. History isn't just a bunch of old dates and names, right? It's a mirror for our world right now. The Portuguese built a global superpower through bold innovation and brute force. But they lost it all by getting arrogant, angering their partners, and totally failing to adapt. So I want to leave you with this thought.